My lamentations become more intense as I continue to surrender myself to our cosmic beloved. Nice to see you, my friends. Thank you for joining me. Today, I would like to address a very important foundational topic that I reference often in my videos. My recent video on meditation, I began by speaking about the aggravators. So this is going to be a video dedicated to removing the aggravators. So what are the aggravators? Before I talk about meditation, I say we need to remove the aggravators. Before I talk about getting balance, I say we have to address and remove and recognize the aggravators. What do I mean by aggravators? These are things that get us unbalanced, get us out of balance. These are things that overstimulate the mind, making it harder to stay present. These are things that overstimulate us or suppress us and make it harder for us to continue on the path of purification and presence. What are the aggravators? Before we talk about how to remove them or address them, what are they? They are things that stimulate the mind. They are sense pleasures. They are part of the illusion, mostly, right? They are things like the television, our phones, movies and TV, video games. They are also things like food, stimulating food or suppressing food, right? All these things, acids aggravate, which could be poor dietary choices, could aggravate us, making it more difficult to do things like stay present, or meditate, or change our diet. It all comes back to balance. We need to address and recognize these things that remove us from balance or move us farther out of balance so we can get back in balance. These things that suppress or stimulate or displace emotions, right? And we also have to look at why. Why are we doing these things that are aggravating us? A lot of it comes down to emotional trauma and suppressing emotional trauma or displacing it or stimulating because we don't want to deal with it. It's all, a lot of it can be subconscious too. And what's interesting is a lot of these things that I have termed aggravators actually get us more out of balance. We use them to suppress or stimulate, but they get us farther out of balance. So we have things like, we have stimulating things. We have like caffeine. We have marijuana. We have a dopamine rush of social media and scrolling, things like this. The list goes on and on, right? Anything that's stimulating. We have pornography. And what we can also recognize, what I recognized through my experience, is these things are all related, because once you start that sense pleasure rush, you're going to go to all the various different types. And what it's going to do is it may suppress emotions temporarily, but it's going to aggravate them overall on a larger scale. So the first step in addressing the aggravators is trying to come into as much of a place of presence as we can, so we can observe. Now remember, as the Tao Te Ching says, stand in the center of the circle. We don't want to have attachments or biases. We want to be able to just observe and do our best to use our what we can just observe without attachments, our common sense, to make a decision, right? So we can observe or recognize things that are throwing us more out of balance. Well, first, it might behoove us to describe what we think balance is. Balance is not needing anything external or stimulation or suppression, and being centered, becoming into center, right? Without the need for these external things, without getting stressed out or having emotional imbalances or having health issues. And it all always comes back, of course, to presence and purification. So we need to recognize what these things are that are aggravating us or that are getting us out of balance. And for me, of course, I can only share with you my experience and perspective and level of understanding. That's all I can ever do, right? It was things like the phone, which I still use I actually have to use the phone to make videos and post, but you need to find a balance with that. If you're going to use it to exist in the world, sometimes we need to take a break from it. And things like scrolling on social media, we can ask ourselves, do I feel more? Just observing, how do I feel after doing these activities? More in balance or out of balance? Things like smoking marijuana. Now, they can be helpful. I'm not saying marijuana is good or bad. I'm not trying to put a positive or negative label on these things, because some things can be helpful for people at some times, and sometimes they are not helpful for people at other times, depending where you are on your journey. Where I'm at on my journey of presence and purification and trying to envelop God's eternal love, I've used things like marijuana as a sort of stimulant, or when I wasn't properly balanced. And I have recognized that when I do use it, that it is hindering my furthering my purification and presence. It's having some undesired effects. But again, we also have to remember not to judge ourselves for any of these aggravators or these things throwing us out of balance. Not to judge ourselves. And these things like bad habits and these things like aggravators, we will release them when the time is right, when we have achieved enough balance to let them go naturally. So a lot of times we can get stuck on things like drinking alcohol, coffee, binge eating junk food, marijuana, pornography, video games, the news. We're addicted to the news. And we got to ask ourselves, again, why are we doing these things in the first place? Why are we doing these things? Why do I need to play video games for 10 hours straight like I used to? Because what happens when you remove all of them and you try to just sit still, right? Sometimes we're not ready to sit still. Our emotional states and our balance is not ready, is not in a good enough state to be able to sit still without these things. So because this is just part of the world where we live in, and the world that we're in. This is part of this illusion, part of the whole racket of it, right? There's just so many levels to this, that we were born into a specific type of life and a specific type of way of living. And now we have to adapt and adjust and purify and cleanse and shed the illusion as best we can, right? So we identify the aggravators. We identify, why am I doing this? Why am I sitting here scrolling on my phone, blah, 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 just checking out those scrolls nonstop? Why? Well, it's probably because I can't sit still with myself for a long enough time and be okay with how I feel, because I'm not ready. Possibly what also happens sometimes, if we go too fast on the purification and we're not balanced enough, you try to go this is what happened to me. This is, again, I can only speak from my experience. I try to push too fast, let's say on the fruits, going to all fruits. I wasn't balanced enough to take that energy and sit with it. So it threw me back out of balance. I got kicked back. I did 131 days of fruit, right? I did 30 days of grapes at the end of that. And I felt good and it was great, right? But I wasn't quite balanced enough to maintain that. I didn't have the overall balance, and I got kicked back. I got kicked back on the I got kicked back into binging junk food, right? Vegan junk food. I've been vegan for almost 10 years, right? And now I've been working and transitioning to raw vegan fruitarian purification, detoxification type diet for the last 5 years. And that has taught me great things. That has taught me many great things, right? Why has it taken me 5 years? Why has it been such a struggle for me when for others it was easy? Well, there's wisdom in suffering, like I've talked about in some of my previous videos. That allows us, going through all these difficult periods in some of our lives, gives us wisdom which we can use to help others. So back to the aggravators, recognizing them, trying to observe why we are using these things that are actually throwing us more out of balance. Anything that's stimulating the mind, stimulating the thought cycles, the never-ending thought cycles, is something that could be considered an aggravator. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as, okay, this could be an aggravator for me. I'm just going to remove it. It's not always that easy. You can try and see what happens. That's all you can do, right? And if you get kicked back, okay, we got to go a little slower, right? We need to. There's no rush. We got all the time in the universe. How many lives have we had? We've had innumerable lives. We've been doing this longer than we can imagine. As the Buddha said, or something similar, imagine a rock or a mountain a mile wide by a mile long by a mile high. And then imagine a bird dropping a silk scarf on top of that rock once every 100 years. And the amount of time it takes for that rock to wear down, that's how long we've been doing this. Let's take that into consideration in our perspective as we're on our journey. Let's just relax. We got all the time in the world, right? And we're just nature running off anyway. So when we're addressing things like these aggravators or bad habits, don't judge ourselves for it. They'll fall off in due time as we continue to work on presence and purification. It always comes back down to these are fundamental things, because no matter what our problem is, if we're caught in the aggravators, if we're caught in these bad habits and we are like, I can't get rid of this bad habit, we have to look at why. A lot of times it's emotional traumas and imbalances, right? And we're using different types of stimulation and suppression and things to displace them or to suppress them, or to stimulate ourselves. A lot of stimulation comes from our bodies don't feel good enough because we're suppressing our physical body with like acids and toxins. So we address them, we recognize them, we say we recognize that we would like to release them at some point, and we work on our balance. How do we get rid of the aggravators? How do we naturally release these bad habits? We work on our balance. We slowly remove what we can, and we feel out of balance. You do what you got to do until you don't have to do it, right? If you're drinking coffee and you're trying to stop drinking coffee, don't stop judging yourself for it. You'll reach a point in your purification journey, you may, where I did, where it's like, okay, coffee's dehydrating. It's extremely acidic, right? And it's just shocking my body. Every time I drink caffeine, it's shocking my body and it's nuking my adrenals, which are already destroyed. When I was drinking coffee, I was perpetually fatigued, even though I was drinking 5 cups a day. That's because I was nuking my adrenals. When I got off of coffee, I felt better. I didn't feel fatigued. Sometimes I feel tired if I didn't sleep enough. This is just one example. So if we're looking at things like alcohol, right? It takes us to recognize why we're using the alcohol and say, okay, I need to get more balance if I want to release this habit. And I have to focus more on things like purification, because the more we focus on things like purification, we'll say, I want my body is a gift from God. My body is God. These are temples of God. So the highest devotion to God is treating these bodies with the utmost respect to the best of our ability. And so we can recognize things like, okay, we can say alcohol. I recognize alcohol is toxic, and I recognize it's acidic, and I recognize it's very dehydrating, etc. Don't judge yourself for drinking it if you're still drinking it, if you still have to use it. Just keep working on the balance, keep working on purification, and keep focusing on staying present. Keep keep furthering your meditation practice, right? Always meditation. Find time to meditate. It doesn't matter what your brain is doing, how many aggravators you got going. Even if you can't stop thinking, it's a practice. Continue your meditation practice. So this is how we kind of address the aggravators, and addressing these, recognizing these, and then realizing we have to work on our balance, and it always comes back to presence and purification, will help us further along in on the path, right? The only path there really is, as presence and purification and surrendering to God's eternal love. So I hope this video was helpful to some of you, to some of my friends out there watching. I'm so grateful you were able to join me for this moment. And I am here for you, with you. I'm speaking to myself, but I'm speaking to you because we're all one, right? I'm just simply sharing my perspective and my experience. That's all we can ever do. If this resonates with someone, that's great. If it doesn't, that's okay, because everybody's going to have a different perspective and have a different experience. We're not here to do it. We don't have to agree. We just have to do the best we can to surrender and be one with God's love. I am God's eternal love pouring forth. Namaste, my friends.